owning this. My daughter at age 17 became severely manic depression.
Yep.
And we went through almost 10 years of hell.
Yep.
Everybody's life turned upside down.
Yep.
And before that, it looked like her life was perfect and everything in our life was great.
Yep.
Then it turned upside down. And now she hasn't been that way since 2002.
Yep.
Okay, she's doing great.
Yep.
In her situation.
Yep.
But what was, and I've felt so much grief, so much pain, so much responsibility. It was my fault that I created this.
Yeah.
And I've been trying in every way I can to fix it, to help, and make up for it. And so I felt responsible for it. But yet, I also, it's like she's got free will. She's got her own choices. And one thing I've always been pretty good at, I think, is honoring her sovereignty and her free will from day one.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the only thing that has kept me sane, is knowing that this is a benevolent, orderly, everything's benevolent. God is totally benevolent. The universe is orderly, beautiful, and she's got free will.
Yep. Yeah.
So do I. But the relationship between us and what I've felt, all this pain and grief of hurting someone that I love so much, it's been the most unbearable pain and grief I could ever imagine.
Felt.
And there were points when I didn't want to live, and I was so regretful of having a child.
Yep.
To cause this much pain to her, to me, to everyone involved.
Yeah.
It was so painful.
And what you were going through was the law of compensation about, the past. Does that make sense?
I don't understand what you're trying to say here.
The law of compensation is a law that whenever we do damage to another person, at some point in the future, we'll have to actually come to recognise the damage that we've done and truly feel it ourselves. And so what you were actually doing in that process that you went through was you were feeling the damage that you've done to your daughter and allowing yourself to grieve over that damage that you've done. And that is a very important part of your progression. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And this is what the law of compensation is. The law of compensation is us having to compensate for the damage we've done to others in our life. And the way we do that, there's two ways we can do that. One way is by going through that experience without God, or the other way is actually like baring our soul, baring ourself completely to God of all the things that we've really done in our lives that have damaged others, and asking God for forgiveness of those things. Right?
So you talk about manic depression, but it's the spirits affecting the person.
Well, what's happened with your daughter is that there's a feeling of powerlessness that she has within herself, that she had, that really came about when she was 17. She's also mediumistic. So the combination of those two things occurred, and she went into this state where she badly, badly wanted to feel powerful. And these spirits were willing to help her feel powerful. And so what they did is they supplied her with lots of energy, which caused her higher states. And where she went off the rails a bit and did all sorts of things, a lot of it was heavily spirit influenced because of that. But it was driven by an emotion that she felt within her that she was powerless before then.
And that came from me.
That came from yourself, and and her environment and her father and emotions there as well, and yes.
Yeah. So was that the law of compensation? I was.
The feelings you were going through, right, were the feelings of the law of compensation. Yeah. In a later discussion, I'll talk about that we don't have to actually feel things in the law of compensation if we do it a different way. Right? And that's to do with the law of repentance and forgiveness. Or what you've heard of grace.
Yes.
It's a fairly common word nowadays, isn't it? Popular word. And we'll talk about that in another session, about divine love and grace and how that affects this whole process. All right? Yeah, you don't actually bypass your own emotion in the process, because that's not possible. But this process of clearing that emotion speeds up rapidly due to this interaction that you have between yourself and God and feeling repentant. Yeah. So the truth is that you still will feel some very painful emotions, but the law of compensation actually is about forgetfulness, and it takes many hundreds of years sometimes to forget these feelings. And this is why spirits who have passed, there's spirits who have passed in the spirit world who know they've done damage to their own children, and 100 years later they are still feeling the results of that damage that they've done to their own children. Right? Now they don't need to go through that process, but they don't know of any other process, and so that's what they need to go through until they learn the other process.
My mother married my father, and the day after she wished she hadn't, and he was mentally ill.
Yep.
She stayed with him 42 years and had 3 children. It's affected all of us tremendously, but
Very.
I was 30 before I consciously knew that he had a problem. My mother covered it up,
Yeah.
and I believe we had a perfect family.
Yeah.
And that's my way of protecting myself.
Yes.
So what you're saying is, my mother handed it down to me. I had all this stuff. I handed it down to my daughter.
You've now broken the cycle.
Well, I want to break the cycle.
You have
Yeah.
already. You have, because you went through the law of compensation about what you've done to your child. Straight away that changes the dynamic. Whether you did it with divine love or not is immaterial. You've actually gone through the law of compensation. Straight away that's changed the dynamic with your children. Straight away. So the grief was worth it.